God bless you and hello, class. Today we want to talk about something that's common or well known to all of us, and that is the King James Bible. All of us are familiar with the King James Bible, so the question now is the King James Bible, is it good or is it bad? The origins of the King James Bible go way back into the ancient languages of Hebrew. You have to look at the Aramaic passages, and then you have to also consider the Koine Greek, which is the more where we get the New Testament. Many of that has been looked upon. You have the Apocrypha books, you have the other ancient writings. You have, for example, the Textus Receptus, which is very popular. And in all of this is saying that we have to understand how the Bible was composed. Biblical composition means that the Bible, it wasn't just put together by happenstance. It wasn't just put together by the size of the text of the passage. It wasn't just put together in terms of when, like chronologically. It was actually established by subject matter, and it was put together over 2,000 years by about 40 different authors from different parts of the world, different cultures. One thing you have to understand about the Bible, there was no difference back in the day, as it were, between the Bible and the law of the land. So the Bible was the law of the land. The prophet and the priest were working together in conjunction to establish a rule. So this is how, like the Ten Commandments, for example, how we have, it was an established rule by the leaders of the land. This is how they, in Islam, the Quran was the rule, Sharia law. The laws were based on the Quranic principles, which were based on the hadiths. These are the laws, the governing rules that the people used. And so up until the time of Constantine, you had, well, especially during his time, until the break of the Roman Empire, you had a consolidation of the leadership and the clergy. So back in the early 300s, 306, 313, back during that time, the early 300s, Constantine combined, and he made Christianity the official ruling religion of the people. The church and the law, the rule of the land was based on some sort of Christian principles. Now, what kind of Christian principles can be argued? What aspect of Christianity did Constantine embrace can be argued. But the idea is that you must understand is that there was a collaboration of a church and the papacy, the rule of law, the church and government. They were working together. They were the leaders. They were the senators, the leaders, the elders of the community. Now, keeping that in mind, you must understand that there were several translations of scriptures. What happened is we didn't have a full Bible or a completed Torah, or even for Islam or other religions, you didn't have that completed work, especially as it relates to Christianity. You didn't have that completed work. It was collected years and years and years. So 2,000 years of collecting. This one's writing here, this one's writing there. Collecting this material and then gathering it together and to make it cohesive and to make it understandable and to rightly divide it, as it were. And so that's why you had all of these councils, all the way up to like the Council of Constantinople, the Council of Trent. You had all of these councils, ecumenical councils, where the council people would get together and figure out, okay, what manuscript do we keep and what manuscript do we throw away? So even the time of putting together the King James Version, they were deciding what manuscripts work and what doesn't. You must understand historically that the Roman Empire was, it was humongous, it was too big, and so it was broken up. But in the process of breaking it up, it actually broke down. It separated. So you had the West and you had the East. So when you think of the West, you think of the barbarians, you think of more of the Latin, where we get like the Latin Vulgate, You think more of that happened to the east, Europe. The west, you think west side, you think more of the Greeks, you think more of the Byzantine. The west side was the best side. The west actually lasted like 1,000 years, though weak and fractured. It lasted like 1,000 years more than the east. So no offense to my people on the east side. But during this time, there was a bunch of manuscripts. People were writing. Why were they writing? Because if I'm enlightened by God, I'm going to write a manuscript. Let me see, that's going to serve me better. So I want my manuscript published because my manuscript, if it can get into the Bible, into the law, then my needs will be met. My family needs are covered. So I'm going to kind of write or submit stuff that's going to do better for me and mine. And so a lot of people had that mindset. And so not all manuscripts are created equal. So there was a lot of problem. People were jockeying to get their manuscripts in because that became the law. It's like how big companies do now. You know, they pad these politicians so that politicians can pass laws that can favor their companies. It's the same concept. People were pushing to get these their manuscripts, their opinions, their concepts or ideas established so that it could become the law of the land and favor them. And so this is the problem that we have with the early manuscripts, from the Latin Vulgate, from the Textus Receptus, King James, the rush job done by Aramis in order to like beat out Martin Luther's work, or Calvin or Zwingli. So you had like competing works that were trying to take place at this particular time. Breathe. I know it's overwhelming. There's a lot happening here. Take a deep breath. Quick anecdotal story. I took a speed reading course some years back. Kevin Trudeau, Howard Burke, these memorization, speed reading. There's other ones out there. And I didn't really believe it at first. Public school education, I used to read slow. A 300-page book would take me about 15 hours to read, worth of full reading time with about 10% retention. Took these courses, got into these courses. This is years ago. I don't even know if they have it, but there's a lot of good techniques in speed reading courses. If you so are inclined, inbox me and I will teach those because it's beneficial. So what happened is I went from 15 hours for like 10% retention for a 300-page book to be able to read a 300-page book in about 2.5 hours with like 50, 60% retention. So I got into this thing where I would be reading 100 books a year. The problem is that I just had too many books. So now they have the online books, they have auto books, they have different ways of collect Kindle, different ways of collecting books that you don't have to have a bunch of books sitting around. But some reference books are good, like this book on the King James, the Textus Receptus and the King James. That's a good book to reference if you're so inclined to. There's another one, the King James Controversy by James White. I'm not getting kickback by these people. I'm just showing you there's a lot of books on it. There's The Word, that's good. It's the 26th translation, pretty thick book. So there's a lot of these books you can read. And of course, my book on verse abuse, which is an excellent piece. You want to get that. So I'm going to give you the summary of a bunch of books because I know all y'all might not be interested in reading a bunch of stuff. Basically, the King James Version is a good copy, but when you understand translation versus transliteration, don't hang your head up on it like the King James Version doesn't have problems. It does have problems, but the problems it has is copyist errors, because we didn't have Kinkos back then. We didn't have fax machines. People wrote by hand, and guess what? People make mistakes. And so mistakes were made in the translations and the copies. Words and concepts used back then are different than words and concepts that we use today. So you will find some difference between how things were thought about and stated back then and how things are thought about and stated now. So the copyist errors have nothing to do with the original works. The original works, wherever they are gone. The original autographs are not here, but we have copies of copies of copies of copies of copies, and we have enough copies to kind of know the acid test, which one is legitimate and which one is not. But the King James, for starters, is a good translation because it holds more to the transliteration. However, there are a lot of copyist errors with that particular translation. So deeper study is required if you want to get more accurate. I would suggest using different versions. If you want to just get storylines, you can use like the NIV. Sometimes the Amplified has some good points. The NASB is great. The ISV is good. If you want references, you use Thompson Chain. There's different ones, but you want to get different people that did different works, the New King James, and then kind of compare them because there is not a perfect translation out there. To err is to be human. And so we can't just copy, 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 copy and hit it on the nail. But if you have a few competing translations, you can kind of make sure that you get closer to what the original concepts were. In closing, King James, good translation for what it's used for, not great, a lot of copyist errors. Professor Smith or Dr. Professor Babel got many titles. Until next time, God bless.